Lady Diana Mosley.
In 1976, Sir Oswald Mosley, the British fascist leader, celebrated his 80th birthday with his dwindling band of loyal followers. At his side was his wife, Diana. 40 years before, the couple scandalized society with their adulterous affair and their support for the Nazis. Diana made friends with Adolf Hitler and acted as a go-between for her lover, Oswald.
I was in love with him, I was in love with life, and to me they were more or less identical.
He was seen as a potential dictator, a dangerous person. Everybody knew that he was very talented. So he did seem like a demon king, and she was the fairy princess, and he carried her off.
In her last interview for television before her death this month, Diana Mosley speaks frankly and unrepentantly about her astonishing and dangerous relationships with Oswald Mosley and Adolf Hitler. Sir Oswald Mosley met his future wife Diana in the summer of 1931, around the time these previously unseen films were made. Mosley came from a wealthy, aristocratic background. All his life he loved jokes and play acting. In his early 30s he was a talented, if maverick, politician who had been first a Conservative, then Labour MP. He was also a married man with 3 young children. His first wife, Simi, also came from an upper-class background, but she shared her husband's politics and had been, briefly, a Labour MP.
I think they were very loving. I think they were very passionate about each other, and I think they also felt they had some sort of joint to tell the world. I think they both wanted to sort of alter the world.
To his wife's distress, Mosley was also a notorious womanizer, but he never allowed his politics to interfere with his social life, once commenting, "I vote Labour, but sleep Tory." Like many of Mosley's mistresses, Georgia Sitwell was a close friend of his wife, Simi. Within the Mosleys' social circles, affairs between married people were commonplace and socially acceptable, as long as there was no scandal. By chance, in the spring of 1932, Simi Mosley captured the latest object of her husband's attentions on film, a young married woman called Diana Guinness.
She was never not beautiful. She was incredible to look at. And didn't matter what she wore, she's well like my granddaughter Stella Tennant in that way. It didn't matter if it was old or anything, she just still looks staggering. She's got a sort of air of beauty as well as being beautiful.
Mosley set his cap at Mrs. Guinness, who was born Diana Mitford. She was 21, the daughter of a peer, and married to Brian Guinness, the enormously rich heir to a brewing fortune. The Guinnesses had been married for just 2 years, but already Diana was finding her somewhat naive and idealistic husband too possessive, and she was prepared to defy him.
I very much dislike being told, no, you're not to lunch or dine with so-and-so, you can do this. I thought how wonderful to be on one's own and do as one pleased. Of course, that's really something that almost never happens, because in the end you get another husband or another reason why you have to do what other people want.
In Oswald Mosley, Diana found a man who combined sexual allure with a cause she could believe in. Very soon she was making unfavorable comparisons between him and her inexperienced husband, Brian.
When she met Mosley, she met a man who was not only very persuasive, with a force of personality to match, even to beat her own. She met somebody who was sexually enormously experienced, light years away from Brian. He was a very fit, active, athletic man who he fenced all his life. He had to have a lot of exercise, and this rather sort of pantherine quality bedazzled her. And she fell hopelessly in love with him.
But Diana's passion for Mosley went far beyond a physical relationship. She spent hours listening to him talking about politics.
I was very taken with his ideas. I thought they sounded so sensible and wise. And in fact, as time went on, it turned out that they were.
Mosley's admirers regarded him as one of the brightest politicians of his generation, even tipping him as a future prime minister. But to his enemies, his vanity, his theatrical style, his flashing eyes, what his son called his lighthouse trick, were repellent.
Oswald Mosley was very ambitious. He just had a supreme sense that he was the best, and that other people ought to really recognize that, and that everything would come to him, that he could get away with everything.
You could put the whole lot today.
When he met Diana Guinness, Mosley was in the political wilderness, having given up on both the Conservative and Labour parties over their failure to deal with unemployment.
The same result that you've got today. You go to bed one night, you wake up in the morning, and you find the great champions of yesterday side by side in the same front bench, arms round each other's necks, dear old pals in the same national government. That's the honesty of the front benches. They've always been all the same.
I think we were absolutely right to desire action. I mean, no man before the war could possibly see employment, bad housing, all the familiar things which I needn't repeat to you, which then existed, without desiring to put them right. No man could see the inertia of the existing system without being indignant against it, without wanting to change things as they were.
In his restless pursuit of action, Mosley turned abroad for inspiration, to fascism. He met Benito Mussolini and was dazzled by the dictator and the way he had galvanized Italy. Mosley enthusiastically embraced the new creed. To him, fascism was both the means to solve Britain's economic problems and the way to revive his own political career. In the autumn of 1932, he launched the British Union of Fascists.
Fascism is new to Great Britain. Because it is new, it will be attacked by some and laughed at by others. Fools always laugh at what they do not understand.
Fascism's emphasis on the personality of the leader and his absolute authority appealed to Mosley's egotism. But fascism was in essence anti-democratic and, as Mosley himself admitted, implicitly racist. A movement in which the ends dictated the means, which were often violent.
Why fascism? Because it was there. It seemed to be the residual force for action. As he liked to put it himself, I'd been through all the other parties. None of them were capable of rising to the challenge. Here was a new force, dynamic, disciplined, modern, receptive to new ideas, all of which was really wrong, actually.
For 2 years, Mosley's movement was secretly funded by the Italian fascists, a fact which he consistently denied throughout his lifetime. One of those who was persuaded to throw in his lot with Mosley was John Beckett, formerly a left-wing Labour MP.
All of Mosley's political party and all his other political colleagues always called him Tom. He was when he became a fascist leader, he expected to be called and to be referred to as the leader. My father again told the story about having tried to recruit a fairly prominent Catholic. And my father used the argument, as one would, that if you were prepared to accept the absolute authority of the Pope in religious matters, why not accept the absolute authority of the leader in political matters? And the Catholics said, well, I don't mind except having the Pope laying down a dogma every 1,000 years or so, but I'm not having Tom Mosley lay one down every 5 minutes.
Diana Guinness was wholly converted to fascism by Oswald Mosley, whom she too referred to as the leader. He and his political ambitions became her life's cause. But Mosley made it clear that he wouldn't leave his wife, Simi. Nevertheless, Diana wanted to abandon her husband so that she could be free to be with Mosley.
I was in love with him, I was in love with life, and to me they were more or less identical. I was considered terribly stupid to do what I did, but I had a compulsion for it.
Diana announced to her husband, Brian Guinness, that she was going to leave him, taking her 2 young children, Desmond and Jonathan, to live with her just round the corner from Oswald Mosley's London flat.
A lot of people would have just been his mistress and sort of carried on. But she was not only young and idealistic, but also very ruthless in a way, and so she said, no, I'm going to be with him, and I don't care if he has got a wife, and I don't care if I have got a husband.
Diana was prepared to overlook Mosley's reputation as a womanizer, and she didn't seem to understand the pain their affair was causing his wife.
It doesn't worry me, he just was a philanderer. And I think his first wife knew he was and accepted it. I mean, say there are men like that. Or probably a big majority, but they pretend not to be. He loved women.
In fact, Simi Mosley, seen here with her husband, was growing increasingly desperate. She saw Diana as a real threat to her marriage, even though Mosley tried to reassure her by telling her the names of all his other mistresses.
She had minded my father's philandering, and there'd been 1 or 2 cases in particular she'd kicked up a fuss. But then that was so much the sort of style of the times that she'd put up with it, and it seemed that she'd go on putting up with it. Anyway, then Diana came along, and it was obvious, I suppose it was pretty obvious to her straight away that this was much more serious. And then, of course, when Diana then left her husband and set up on her own, then it was obviously really serious. And my mother minded, and there is evidence she was very upset and sad.
Simi's health had not been good since the birth of her 3rd child, and with Diana a constant presence in her life, she declined physically. In May 1933, just after this picture was taken, Simi was taken ill with acute appendicitis, which developed into peritonitis. She died aged 34, leaving 3 children, a baby, Mickey, Nicholas, and a girl, Vivian, aged 12.
Her family have told me they feel very strongly that Diana bore a great responsibility for Simi's death. Vivian told me that peritonitis is what killed my mother, but with Diana there, she didn't want to live.
Mosley's children, Vivian, Mickey, and Nicholas, were cared for partly by their mother's sisters, who closed ranks against Diana. The relationship between her and Oswald Mosley had devastated their families. But she had cast in her lot with him, and together they would stop at nothing to pursue their joint cause. In the summer of 1933, after Adolf Hitler had come to power, Oswald Mosley's mistress, Diana Guinness, decided to spend her summer holidays in Germany with her younger sister, Unity Mitford. Diana wants fascism in action. And for her, Hitler's Germany would become the model for what her beloved Mosley might be able to achieve in Britain. She made sure she was invited to the Parteitag, the big Nazi rally in Nuremberg. In this film, made by Hitler's favourite director, Leni Riefenstahl, Diana is seen saluting the Nazi leader. Afterwards, she wrote that when Hitler appeared, an almost electric shock passed through the multitude. It was the beginning of a love affair with Nazi Germany, which would end in death and disgrace.
We thought it was a phenomenon. They had marvelous songs for marching to. It was very unlike what you might call a Conservative Party conference at Brighton or the Labour Party conference at Blackpool. There was a great feeling of excitement, no doubt.
Accompanying Diana in Germany was her 19-year-old sister, Unity Mitford. Under Diana's influence, the naive and fanatical Unity had been totally converted to fascism and Oswald Mosley. Indeed, Unity attended the Parteitag as a delegate of the British Union of Fascists.
Diana was a much more intelligent person than Unity, and she had access, through Mosley, to intelligent people who could argue the fascist and Nazi case. And she had all the arguments. And Unity had all the emotions. She was a kind of social and emotional Nazi, whereas Diana was a much more calculating political Nazi.
Diana taking Unity to Germany in 1933 changed her sister's life. Unity became totally obsessed by Adolf Hitler, and she stayed on in Germany to meet her hero. After months spent hanging round in Hitler's favourite cafe in Munich, Unity was asked to join him at his table. And by sheer persistence, she insinuated herself into Hitler's intimate circle. Unity's connection with Oswald Mosley interested Hitler. And when Diana herself returned to Germany, Unity introduced her sister, Führer.
He was very easy to talk to. You could ask him questions. He wasn't at all standoffish. And then the theory that he liked a monologue, in my experience, quite untrue. He liked conversation.
The Mitford sisters were not the only British visitors to be beguiled by Hitler's table talk. In 1936, the former Liberal Prime Minister, Lloyd George, seen here on the left, visited the Führer at his mountain retreat. Afterwards he wrote that Hitler was a born leader of men, a magnetic, dynamic personality.
He did have a sense of humour because he very clever at imitations, which is a sign that somebody's very observant. People around him and people he'd met, Mussolini, for example, and he could take people off in a very clever way.
Unity Mitford's photograph albums with their German captions lovingly record her and Diana's intimate relationship with leading Nazis between 1935 and 1939. But during this period, there was plenty of evidence, for those who wished to see it, of the dark side of Hitler's regime. Diana and Unity chose to ignore it.
The persecution of Jews had started, the persecution of liberals had started from the minute Hitler seized power in February 1933. Buchenwald is opened, Dachau is opened in the spring of 1933. And Diana is quoted as having a tease that, which was a common tease in Germany at that time, that if you say the wrong thing, you'll go to Dachau. Lieber Gott, mach mich dumm, dass ich nicht nach Dachau komme.
I never heard him mention the Jews, ever. It never preoccupied me much, and it just never cropped up. What I admired in Germany was that politicians there had solved problems which were very acute in England, like unemployment and poverty. And of course, that seemed at the time rather a miracle.
Desmond and I were travelling on a train, and there were two ladies being rude about Hitler, and I apparently piped up and I said, "My mummy thinks Hitler's right." Upon which one of the ladies said, "Then I think I know who your mummy is." And of course she was absolutely right. She saw Nazi Germany, which seemed attractive, as an example of what Britain could be like under Mosley.
Back in England, Diana and Unity relayed their enthusiasm for Nazi Germany to Diana's lover, Oswald Mosley. And encouraged by Hitler's success, Mosley now turned more and more to German rather than Italian fascism for inspiration.
The worldwide fascist movement has made a new advance in Germany. They have reached power after polling over 17 million votes in a general election. And we believe that Britain, where our British Union of Fascists has already advanced at a record rate, will be the next country to give fascism a chance.
Germany, a much more powerful country than Italy, and also there was more hope, there was also more danger, but I think it just was a good deal more interesting.
By 1934, Mosley's British Union of Fascists was at the peak of its popularity, with 40,000 members drawn from all sections of society. Inspired by the example of continental fascists, Mosley had decreed that his followers should wear a uniform, the black shirt.
One of the biggest and most significant demonstrations in British political history is staged at Olympia, where a mass meeting is held by the British Union of Fascists.
A hard core of Mosleyites were to remain loyal to the leader for the rest of their lives.
When Oswald Mosley came onto the platform and started speaking, he just held everybody spellbound. He was an extremely good orator, but not just hot air. There was thought and intellect behind what he was saying, but also at the time you felt an ennoblement almost, that he was, you know, you could strive for something up and beyond yourself.
And I claim that in the ranks of our black shirt legions march the mighty ghosts of England's past, and their strong arms around us, and their voices echo down the ages, saying onward.
To the majority of the British people, Mosley's fascists were seen as an alien political force. He was feared as a potential dictator, a man who would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. And his meetings attracted violent opposition.
Now, I don't want any fighting up in that room.
His most fervent enemies were left-wingers, socialists, communists, and Jews, who were worried by the rumours of persecution emanating from Nazi Germany.
They were attacked by Jews the whole time. I think he felt they were enemies that would never change, and therefore, in a way, they started the quarrel.
Diana and her sister Unity Mitford had witnessed the popularity of anti-Semitism in Germany. Now Oswald Mosley reached the conclusion that playing the Jewish card would benefit his fascist movement in Britain. From 1934 onwards, Mosley adopted anti-Semitism, arguing that Jewish financiers, who controlled the city, were contributing to Britain's economic problems. In his newspapers, Black Shirt and Action, he allowed his followers to publish crude anti-Semitic propaganda. But later in life, Sir Oswald vehemently denied that he personally had ever espoused anti-Semitism.
Actually, there is no evidence whatsoever that I've found, or that anybody else I'm aware of has found, that Mosley ever made the smallest attempt to prevent it, and all the evidence suggests that he himself initiated and led the crudest and most bitter anti-Semitic campaign.
Passing the Tower of London, 1,000 fascists rally to their mobilization for the much advertised march through the East End. And Sir Oswald Mosley, black shirt leader, arrives at Royal Mint Street to inspect his followers. In step here, thousands of East Enders...
In the mid-1930s, Mosley and his supporters held marches in London's East End, home to one of the country's biggest and poorest Jewish communities, stoking the flames of racial hatred. Mosley's rallies became synonymous with violence, and his movement rapidly lost what little support it had.
A great many people in the East End who really were anti-Semites joined him because they hoped that they'd make him one. I don't think, he ever was, which is so extraordinary, though he has that reputation.
But Diana didn't want to say anything that my father stood for was ever wrong, which is not a tenable position. I mean, one can find reasons for a lot of what my father did in the 30s, the sort of passionate feeling he was do something about the economic crisis. The one thing that, quite rightly, no one really can find any sane good word to say about was the way he quite cynically espoused anti-Semitism.
Diana also applied her extraordinary ability to ignore unpleasant facts to her private life. It was a skill which would stand her in good stead with Mosley. Every summer he took his children for a holiday cruising round the Mediterranean, and Diana would join them for part of their trip. The young Nicholas Mosley was captivated by Mrs. Guinness, while not being aware of the precise relationship between her and his father.
She would sit on the boat looking beautiful, and she at that time had a rather primitive accordion, which she used to play and sing romantic Neapolitan songs or sad songs. And she would sit on the front of the boat, and she was like the sort of Lorelei, the mermaid. And she was good with my father in that she kept him happy, and they would sort of tease one another. They had this sort of private sort of joke language. It was a very good relationship.
Diana was every year Mosley invited his dead wife's sister, Baba Metcalfe, who acted as a surrogate mother to his children, to join them for the first fortnight of their holiday. What he never explained was that he and his former sister-in-law had been having an affair since shortly after his wife's death.
Baba would go one night, and Diana would turn up, and they'd overlap halfway across the Bay of Naples, I suppose, you see. And when he was a very old man, he'd say, "Do you think that was immoral?" I said, "Oh, Dad, it's a bit late in the day to start wondering whether that's immoral."
Diana was always absolutely brilliant at shutting her eyes to what she didn't want to see. That was one of her strengths. She ignored things she didn't like. And she was younger than Baba. Baba was beautiful, but she was more beautiful. And she had Mosley's promise. And I think this gave her a certain amount of confidence. And this is how she coped.
Sure enough, in the end, Diana triumphed. In 1936, she and Oswald Mosley went on another holiday, this time to Germany. They had decided to marry, but wanted to keep their liaison secret from the British press. Once again, Diana's German contacts were invaluable. But when people in England discovered that the Mosleys had been secretly married in Berlin, it proved immensely damaging to the couple's reputation. They would be reviled as intimate friends of the Nazi regime. Their wedding party was held in the house of Hitler's propaganda chief, Joseph Goebbels, and the Führer was one of the guests.
The Reichskanzlei, where he lived, had a big garden, and it joined to the garden of the Goebbels' house, so he could walk from one to the other without being in the street. And he had an adjutant with him, and that's all. And there were just two friends of my husband, my sister Unity, and the Goebbels, that's all. He gave us a present. I think it's been made so much of since, but I think it was very clever of us to discover a way whereby we could keep the marriage secret, which is what we wished to do.
Mosley installed like a fairy princess in a large house in a remote part of Staffordshire, while he stomped round the country making speeches. And for the next 2 years, until the birth of their first child, Mosley told no one, not even his children, that Diana was their stepmother.
He kept it secret, partly because he didn't want Diana to come under attack, either physical attack or attack in the papers, hostility. And also, I think as an added bonus advantage, if he kept it secret, then he could go on seeing the Baba. I mean, the Baba had always said, apparently, that if he ever married Diana, she would then stop seeing him.
The fact that Diana was not known to be his wife would serve Mosley's interests in other ways. By 1937, membership of his fascist party was declining, and Mosley was left with a small band of dedicated followers who joined in all his party's activities, including an annual summer camp. But the party needed funds. Donations from the Italian dictator Mussolini had dried up. Mosley now enlisted the help of his wife and encouraged her to exploit her friendship with Hitler to raise money. He sent Diana to Germany to negotiate a concession to set up a radio station broadcasting from Germany to Britain. The proceeds from advertising sales would be used to fund the British Union of Fascists.
We didn't want me associated with it in any way. But I had to go over quite often. And as Mrs. Guinness, I wasn't noticed, but I think if I'd been Lady Mosley, I would have been by probably journalists, and they'd have wanted to know why and so on.
To handle the legal side of the negotiations, Diana was accompanied to Germany by a young British lawyer.
She was going the social round and picking up information as best she could as to what was the possibility of getting a concession. I gathered she was mixing in government circles at all sorts of levels.
I tried to get money from the Germans just as I did from the English, but they were very sticky about it. It wasn't until we had our radio project that we were out of the wood.
Frequent money-raising trips to Germany to see Hitler would lead to her downfall. Unbeknown to her, the British authorities were now monitoring fascist sympathizers, including Lady Mosley. Later, when he was interviewed by the authorities, Oswald Mosley himself admitted that it was thanks to his wife's close friendship with Hitler that he secured his radio concession.
Yes, I was a go-between. That's the only thing I could do. I'm not a speaker, and no good at propaganda, and that was something I could do, really.
The deal was clinched just weeks before Britain declared war on Germany, so the radio station came to nothing. Mosley was suspected of being prepared to broadcast fascist propaganda. What's more, he never once criticized Hitler for his aggressive policies and disregard for international treaties. Right up to the bitter end, Mosley campaigned against Britain going to war with Germany.
We had a slogan at that time, which I still think was a very good one, which was "Mind Britain's Business." We had a huge empire. We had a country which was not at all well governed. We should have minded Britain's business and not interfered with what Hitler wanted to do in the East.
Mosley claimed that if he were elected, he would form an alliance with Germany, which would guarantee the British Empire and secure peace.
When we have power, there will be no war, because we shall make peace with Germany and Italy in a new union of the great nations of Europe.
What's more, to avoid war with Germany and advance their fascist cause in Britain, the Mosleys resolutely turned a blind eye to the barbarity of the Nazi regime. By 1938, the British papers were reporting Nazi persecution of German Jews. These stories were dismissed as lying Jewish propaganda by Oswald Mosley. On the eve of the war, in July 1939, the British Union of Fascists held a huge rally at Earl's Court in London, at which Mosley ridiculed the idea that Britain had a moral duty to go to war to protect the Jews.
all their money power, when we reach that point which now we approach, the mass, and when the might of the people is so great and so terrific that even the money power cannot withstand it.
Again and again, I defined Jewish corruption as the use of money power to promote a world war. They were using their money power all the time, not only to attack me, but to promote a world war. Not all Jews, but some Jews. And if Welshmen were doing it, or Hottentots, I'd say it was corruption.
In order to promote British fascism and further Mosley's ambitions, Diana also ignored the brutal side of Hitler's regime.
They made these Nuremberg laws whereby the Jews were second-class citizens, and I think he hoped they would all go away to America. Well, a good many did, but a great many stayed.
In April 1939, 4 months before war broke out, Hitler celebrated his 50th birthday with an intimidating display of military might. But right up to the end, the Mosleys sought his financial support, absorbed his ideas, and believed him when he said he wanted peace with Britain. Meanwhile, Hitler was planning to ignore his undertakings, defy Britain's ultimatum, and provoke the war which would unleash the Holocaust.
His greatest crime, in my opinion, and this is what my husband always felt, was that he lit the match which started that terrible war, because all the atrocities and horrors which happened afterwards could never have happened but for war.
Their association with Hitler would bring down on the Mosleys political disgrace and personal tragedy. In August 1939, Diana Mosley visited Germany for the last time. At the Wagner Festival at Bayreuth, as she and her sister Unity Mitford listened to Götterdämmerung, Hitler told her that war between their two countries was now inevitable. Diana wrote, "Never had the glorious music seemed so doom-laden." In her heart, she knew that everything she and Oswald Mosley believed in turned to ashes. And Diana had further personal reasons to feel a chill of fear.
She sat next to Unity listening to Götterdämmerung, having been told by Unity that if there was a war, Unity would shoot herself. So obviously she listened to that music, as she puts it herself, with death in her heart.
Three weeks later, Hitler invaded Poland, which was the trigger for Britain to declare war. Unity Mitford had remained in Germany, torn between her devotion to Hitler and the Nazis and her love for the country of her birth. Suicide seemed to her the only option.
All my thoughts were with her and wondering how she would do it and so on. And then a Hungarian friend, because in those days Hungary was neutral, rang my mother and father up and said she's in hospital, but she's alive.
Apparently the news of the moment should be the return of Unity Mitford.
On the 3rd of September 1939, the day Britain declared war on Germany, Unity Mitford had shot herself in the head, but not fatally. Hitler had asked her whether she wanted to stay in Germany or return home. She chose to return to England.
Conversations be overheard, his lordship phoned from a public call box. Finally, the Channel steamer arrived, and then thanks to the breakdown of the first ambulance and the consequent delay, our cameraman was able to secure this picture of Miss Unity Mitford.
It was a sort of nightmare. She was like a different person. She was like somebody who'd had a major stroke or something, and now she was a different person completely to what we'd known. So you can imagine the shock of seeing that.
Unity Mitford would be the first casualty in the Mosleys' disastrous relationship with Hitler.
She just loved the country, loved the people, loved the music, loved the literature, loved the politics. And she really and truly, towards the end of the time, she practically lived there.
She never recovered from her suicide attempt and died at the age of 34 from meningitis caused by the bullet in her head.
I imagine Diana feels very responsible for what she did for unity and how her example, she got away with it and unity did not. Unity paid the price by his dead. And obviously that now must cast a big black shadow over the whole relationship.
The Mosleys' ill-starred liaison with Hitler was to lead to further disaster. Oswald Mosley could not believe the game was up. On the 1st of September 1939, just before war was declared, Mosley had told his supporters that he would fight for Britain, but he was not prepared to fight in the quarrel with what he called Jewish finance. Throughout 1940, when Britain was already at war, he persisted in urging the government to make peace with Germany. The public now regarded him as a potential traitor.
We were fighting a war against fascism, and he was Britain's leading fascist. So it was inevitable that he would be arrested, and I think there was a popular demand for his imprisonment, because he was on the other side, so to speak.
Under Britain's newly amended Defence Regulation 18B, the police have swooped upon the British Union of Fascists' London headquarters.
Defence Regulation 18B allowed the government to arrest anyone who might be subject to foreign influence or control. On the 23rd of May 1940, Sir Oswald Mosley was arrested.
Detained indefinitely. The nation, at any rate, is delighted to know that the authorities are taking action.
A month later, the police arrived to take his wife to Holloway Prison in London.
I said, "How long will I be at Holloway?" And she said, "Just a weekend. Just put enough things for a weekend in a little case." Which I did, and I believed her about the weekend. But of course it wasn't true at all. I was there 3.5 years.
Diana Mosley was interned with a number of other female members of the British Union of Fascists who welcomed the wife of the leader.
They didn't have much time for a show of sentimentality. And of course, she had this terrific wit and sense of humour. She really did. She must have missed her children, but then when they visited her, I think about the first time, even then she was amused. She said, "I think they were disappointed I wasn't in chains." And of course that to her was a huge joke.
For 3 years, while she was in Holloway, Diana was apart from her children, Desmond and Jonathan Guinness, and her sons by Oswald Mosley, Max and Alexander. The separation had a particularly damaging effect on Alexander, who was only 2 when his mother was imprisoned.
My earliest memory of that is going and visiting her in prison with my brother. I think it was very hard on her. I think she made the visits a bit fewer because it was upsetting her and it was upsetting us, actually. I may be one of the few people who was really objected to leaving prison. I was carried out kicking and screaming. Well, you know, I think that upset her.
Diana adapted to the tough prison conditions her way. She ordered bottles of port through her Harrods account and kept warm at night under an old fur coat. Imprisoned without trial, her right to appeal was exercised on the 2nd of October 1940. But her closeness to Hitler, her frequent visits to Nazi Germany, and her secret marriage to Oswald in Berlin counted against her.
It was a terrible thing to do, to arrest somebody who had 4 young children, and simply because they'd had lunch with Hitler. Well, if I'd known that it was supposed to be a dangerous thing to do, nobody ever suggested it was, I suppose I would never have done it.
But during her cross-examination, Diana defiantly refused to conceal her admiration for Hitler or deny her political beliefs. When she was asked, "If you had power, would you displace the present form of government in this country with a fascist regime?" Diana answered, "Yes." The committee unanimously recommended that she should be kept in prison, where she and her husband remained for 3 years. In November 1943, they were released in massive public protest. Although the couple could never admit it, the war and their association with Hitler destroyed Oswald Mosley's political reputation. And after the war, he and his wife were obliged to confront the full extent of Hitler's genocide.
I suppose must have been ordered by him, but it's really inconceivable. I think people change. I think, you know, if you've lost a great war, and they had stood up to the whole world for 6 years, I suppose it probably does something to you. I think he was, in a way, probably a sick man.
Once when I was alone with Diana, and we were talking about this theme of themes, she said, "Oh, I regret ever having been in Germany. I just wish I'd never been near the place. I wish I'd never met him," meaning Hitler. What she's not prepared to say is, "I was not the friend." She will not betray that friendship. She won't say, "No, I never knew him. No, I didn't really like him. No, I always saw through." She's strong and she's loyal, and she says, "Yes, I was his friend." But at the same time, she feels more let down by her own folly, if you like, but certainly by his wickedness, than it's possible to say.
Despite the fiasco of fascism, Oswald Mosley found it impossible to stay out of politics. In the 1950s, he formed a new party, the Union Movement, dedicated to the foundation of a European superstate. But just as he had with anti-Semitism before the war, Mosley also embraced the inflammatory issue of black and Asian immigration to Britain. Inevitably, the Union Movement attracted support from racists, far-right extremists, as well as many of Mosley's pre-war supporters.
Now came the arrival of the great leader himself. They crowd, "Down with Mosley," and down he went.
Throughout the vicissitudes of her husband's career, Diana Mosley continued to support him and attend the reunions organised in his honour.
She rather loves the fact that the very word fascist makes most people's hair stand on end in England, for obvious reasons. So that she doesn't mind at reunions and seeing these people. At the same time, she is genuinely very fond of them, and she's very grateful to them that they stayed loyal to her and her husband throughout the war and after the war, and long after, as a matter of fact. She had diverged from them politically to the point where she'd more or less become what I would call a liberal.
After the war, life in England was very difficult for the Mosleys, and they decided to move abroad. For the last 30 years of Oswald Mosley's life, the couple lived in a house outside Paris. Here, Diana created for her husband what one of Mosley's sons called a garden in the present, which shielded him from the outside world. Sir Oswald Mosley died on the 3rd of November 1980 at the age of 84. As a final tribute, one of those present made this film and sound recording of Diana and her extended family as they gathered to mourn Mosley. For the last 20 years of her life, his widow devoted herself to defending her husband's reputation. To the end, Diana did not recant her views or apologize for her youthful enthusiasm for Hitler.
I think she probably regrets having held those opinions, but I don't think she'd ever say so in public. I have to say that the last time I saw her, I asked her, looking back on your life, what is the profoundest feeling you have? And she simply said, remorse.
I dedicated my life to him, really, and then I still feel that he was so right, and that what we did was the best we could.
Tell us what you think about this or any programme on TV at channel4.com/thinktv. Tomorrow night at 9, it's the story of the conjoined twins in Dying to Be Apart. Next up, BBC presenters not just crossing the line, but snorting it. Coke and Auntie. Tut, tut, tut.